For years, people whispered the same thing about Michael Jackson. They said he was gay. They said it with a smirk, like it was an open secret. But every time those words reached his brothers and sisters, their response was the same: cold, blunt, and unforgettable. Leave your wife or your girlfriend alone with him for one day, and you'll find out. That wasn't a joke. That wasn't PR. That was the voice of the people who grew up with Michael under the same roof. The ones who watched him struggle with a face full of severe acne so bad he couldn't even look people in the eye. The ones who saw him hide behind stage lights because the real world refused to accept him as a normal human being. The ones who watched the media turn his surgeries into a circus and his name into a scandal. Today, for the first time, we're laying out exactly what Michael Jackson's own siblings have revealed about the drastic changes to his face, the surgeries the world twisted into myths, and the allegations that nearly destroyed not just him, but the entire Jackson family. These aren't rumors. These are the words of the people who were there. And some of what you're about to hear will shock you. Revelation 1. The face that made Michael afraid to look anyone in the eye. Before the world crowned him the king of pop, before the sequined glove and the moonwalk, Michael Jackson lived through a private hell that his own brothers and sisters still speak about with a kind of quiet heaviness. It wasn't the pressure of fame, it wasn't the relentless rehearsals or their father's iron discipline. It was his face. One of his siblings later described it with unsettling clarity. I was very close to my mother, and she was like a comfort to him, I think. They spent a lot of time together. At one point, Michael was going through a stage where he had a serious acne problem. And it had gotten so bad that Michael was afraid to really look at people in the face and talk to them. I mean, when he talked to you, he'd look down. And my mother was sensitive toward that. I think because of her interest in wanting to help him, to give him the needed support that was necessary then, that caused a lot of the closeness. That is not a casual memory. That is a brother or sister looking back at a boy whose skin had turned against him so completely that ordinary human contact became terrifying. The acne was not ordinary teenage breakouts. It was severe, aggressive, and relentless. It covered his face from forehead to chin. Cysts formed. Scarring began. The once cute little Michael that fans adored on television had been replaced by a lanky adolescent whose skin erupted so badly that strangers would literally shake their heads when they realized who he was. People who came to the Havenhurst house expecting the charming child star would walk right past the tall, awkward teenager standing in front of them. When he finally spoke up and said, "I'm Michael," they looked doubtful. Some looked disappointed. Michael himself later admitted the damage went far deeper than the surface. In his own words, the acne messed up my whole personality. He said he became subconsciously scarred. He described looking in the mirror one morning and thinking, "Oh no." He felt he had a pimple for every oil gland on his face. The more he worried about it, the worse it became. He stopped looking people in the eye. When he spoke, his gaze stayed fixed on the floor. He kept his head down. He wore hats constantly. Off stage, he barely spoke. Success meant nothing to him in those moments because he felt he had nothing to be proud of. The only time the shame disappeared was when the stage lights hit him. On stage, under the lights, with the audience screaming, the acne vanished from his mind. The second he walked off, it was waiting for him again. His mother, Catherine, watched the change with quiet heartbreak. She later said the severe acne that circled his face from forehead to chin transformed her son from an outgoing, devilish boy into a loner. He became quieter, more serious, withdrawn. The boy who once moved through the world with natural energy now searched for shadows. In the middle of that isolation, Catherine became his only real refuge. She did not lecture him. She did not force him to just be confident. She simply stayed near. She sat with him. She offered presence instead of pressure. That silent support created a bond between mother and son that ran deeper than almost any other relationship in Michael's life. His siblings noticed it. They understood it. In a house full of noise, ambition, and fear of their father, Catherine's quiet acceptance was the only place Michael could lower his guard. The contrast was brutal. On stage, Michael was already a phenomenon, singing, dancing, commanding attention far beyond his years. Offstage, he was a teenager so ashamed of his own face that he avoided mirrors, avoided eye contact, and sometimes avoided people altogether. He later told interviewers that he would hide his face in the dark. The same young man who could hold thousands of people in the palm of his hand could not bring himself to meet the eyes of someone standing 3 feet away. Even his brothers contributed, sometimes without realizing the damage. The nickname Big Nose that floated around the family stuck in his mind like a permanent bruise. Combined with the acne, it created a perfect storm of self-loathing. Michael began to see his reflection as something that needed fixing, something that needed erasing. Years later, his dermatologist, Dr. Arnold Klein, would still speak with visible emotion about how bad the scarring had been. He described Michael scrubbing his face with Brillo pads in desperate attempts to clear the skin. He talked about the long weekends spent trying to rebuild a face that had been ravaged first by acne and later by the surgeries meant to correct it. The damage was never just cosmetic, it was psychological. It rewired how Michael saw himself and how he believed the world saw him. This was the beginning, not the plastic surgery, not the changing skin tone, not the rumors that would later explode across the tabloids. It started here, with a boy whose face betrayed him at the exact moment the world demanded he remain perfect and frozen in time as cute little Michael. His siblings watched it happen in real time. They saw the head drop, they saw the withdrawal, they saw their mother become the only safe harbor. And decades later, when they spoke about it, the memory still carried weight. Because they understood something the public never fully grasped. The most famous face in the world once belonged to a teenager who was so ashamed of it that he could not look another human being in the eye. That shame never completely left him. It simply changed shape. And everything that came after, the surgeries, the masks, the increasing distance from ordinary life, can be traced, at least in part, back to those years when Michael Jackson's own skin made him feel like a stranger in his own body. Revelation 2. The stage, the only place Michael was allowed to live. His brothers and sisters saw it long before the rest of the world did. Michael Jackson only fully existed when the lights came up. The change was almost physical. The moment the stage lights hit him, something locked into place. The young man who kept his eyes on the floor off stage straightened, his shoulders opened, his body moved with a precision and freedom that seemed impossible in ordinary rooms. The insecurity that clung to him in daylight, the memory of severe acne, the teasing about his nose, the constant awareness of being watched, lifted for a few hours. Under those lights he became sharp, powerful, almost weightless. He commanded arenas the way other people breathe. Then the lights went out. The transformation reversed just as quickly. The same man who had held tens of thousands of people in the palm of his hand would return to the dressing room and grow quiet. Sometimes he sat for a long time still wearing the costume, the sequins catching the weaker backstage lights. The roar outside faded. The energy that had filled him drained away. Reality returned, heavier than before. His siblings recognized the pattern early. They had shared small rooms with him as children. They had watched him hide his face after shows when the acne was at its worst. They had seen him look down when strangers approached. On stage he was free. Off stage the world refused to meet him halfway. People did not want the ordinary Michael who came home tired or uncertain. They wanted the perfected version they had already fallen in love with under the lights. When the real man appeared, quieter, marked by the changes happening to his face, some looked disappointed. A few looked at him as if he had somehow broken a promise. Marlon later described the distance that grew around his brother as a kind of glass cage. Inside it, the Michael from Gary, Indiana, the one who once shared bunk beds and late-night jokes with his brothers, slowly disappeared from public view. The world only accepted the stage version. The real one was pushed further into the background. Jermaine carried a different memory. Even years after Michael's death, when the remaining brothers performed the old songs, their bodies still automatically left space on the right side of the stage. From the earliest Jackson 5 days, Michael had always stood there. Muscle memory refused to forget. The gap remained open, waiting for a presence that would never fill it again. Michael himself understood the dependency better than anyone. He spoke of the stage as home. Offstage, he felt the loneliness settle in almost immediately. The energy of the crowd, the heat of the lights, the pure exchange between performer and audience. That was the only environment where he felt completely accepted. Everywhere else carried conditions. The stage asked only that he give everything. In return, it gave him the one place where his face, his history, and his private pain did not matter. The pattern had roots in childhood. As a boy already performing in adult nightclubs, Michael learned that the stage was the one zone where ordinary rules did not apply. Offstage, he was the child who saw too much too soon, the teenager whose skin betrayed him, the young man who could not look people in the eye without feeling exposed. On stage, none of that followed him. The audience saw only the talent. For those hours, the body that caused him so much private shame became an instrument of pure expression. As the years passed and his appearance continued to change, the divide widened. The surgeries, the skin condition, the evolving features, all of it made the offstage Michael harder for the public to accept. People had fallen in love with an image frozen in time. When that image shifted, many resisted. Some turned critical. Others simply looked away. The stage remained the only consistent place where he was still welcomed without conditions or judgment. His brothers and sisters watched the cost accumulate. After major shows, they sometimes found him sitting alone, still half in costume, the adrenaline gone. The same young man who could make an entire stadium move as one often struggled with the simplest human interactions once the performance ended. Ordinary conversation felt foreign. Ordinary rooms felt too small and too bright. The stage became more than a workplace. It became sanctuary. It became the only environment where Michael did not have to apologize for existing. No one demanded that he be normal there. No one scrutinized the changes in his face or measured him against the child star they remembered. Under the lights, he was allowed to be exactly who he needed to be in that moment, powerful, free, and temporarily whole. But the price kept rising. Every time he stepped off stage, he had to leave behind the version of himself the world preferred. That preferred version stayed under the lights. The real skin, the one that carried the history of acne, the surgeries, the exhaustion, the private battles, was increasingly rejected. The more tightly the public clung to the stage image, the harder it became for the man himself to exist anywhere else. His siblings saw the slow separation with a mixture of understanding and quiet grief. They had known the boy before the world claimed him. They had watched him find temporary safety under the lights. And they understood more clearly than most that once the stage became the only place he felt fully allowed to live, the rest of his life would grow steadily more isolated. The tragedy was not that Michael loved the stage. The tragedy was that the stage became the only place the world would let him be whole. Revelation 3. How the media turned Michael's surgeries into a circus of madness. His brothers and sisters never denied that Michael had plastic surgery. They knew he had. What enraged them was the way the press took every real change and twisted it into something grotesque, almost inhuman. They watched the stories multiply like a virus. In September 1986, the National Enquirer published a photograph of Michael lying inside a hyperbaric oxygen chamber at Brotman Memorial Hospital. The chamber was real. Michael had donated money to the hospital's burn unit after the Pepsi commercial accident that left him with second- and third-degree burns on his scalp. He posed inside the machine during a visit. That single image was enough. Within days, the headline mutated. Michael Jackson, the papers claimed, slept in an oxygen chamber every night. He believed pure oxygen would slow the aging process and allow him to live to the age of 150. Some reports even quoted him saying he planned to install one in his bedroom so he could take long naps that made him feel like a new person. His own doctor publicly advised against it. The company that manufactured the chambers refused to sell him one for private use, calling the idea medically nonsensical. None of that mattered. The story had already escaped into the culture. For years afterward, people repeated it as fact. Michael Jackson sleeps in a glass oxygen tank because he wants to live forever. Then came the skin. As Michael's complexion grew steadily lighter through the late 1980s and 1990s, the tabloids abandoned all restraint. They wrote that he was systematically bleaching his skin with powerful chemicals. They claimed he was injecting hormones to change his racial identity. Some stories suggested he was trying to erase every trace of blackness from his body. The language grew uglier with each retelling. He was no longer a man dealing with a medical condition. He was a cosmetic monster, a man so ashamed of his race that he was destroying himself to escape it. His siblings read those articles with a mixture of fury and disbelief. One of them later shook his head and said almost wearily, "It's so crazy. We're reading all these reports about Michael bleaching his skin or taking hormone treatments, all this kind of stuff." The reality, they insisted, was far more complicated and far more painful. Michael had vitiligo, a condition that destroyed the pigment in patches across his body. Left untreated, the blotches would have left him looking, in Tito's blunt words, like a spotted animal or a cow with spots. The creams and treatments he used were an attempt to even out the uneven loss of color so he would not have to live with a body that looked diseased. The media almost never led with that explanation. They preferred the simpler, more sensational narrative. Michael hates being black and is bleaching himself white. Every nose surgery, every subtle change to his face, was inflated into dozens of procedures. By the time the stories reached their peak, the public version of Michael Jackson had undergone so many operations that he barely seemed human anymore. The man his family knew, the one who had once been terrified of looking people in the eye because of severe acne, was erased. In his place stood a cartoon of vanity and self-destruction carefully constructed to sell newspapers. The siblings watched it happen in real time. They saw how a single photograph, a medical diagnosis, and a few confirmed surgeries were weaponized into a permanent public myth. Michael was turned into the ultimate tabloid creature, part freak, part cautionary tale, part endless source of revenue. The truth, that he was a man struggling with real physical conditions, real insecurity, and the crushing pressure of being the most famous face on earth, was too quiet, too complicated, and therefore useless to the machine that needed him to remain forever strange. What hurt them most was not that the public believed the exaggerated stories. It was that the stories were so loud, so constant, and so profitable that the quieter, more human reality never stood a chance. Revelation 4. The allegations and the betrayal from those closest to him. This is the heaviest part of everything the siblings have revealed. They keep returning to one point the world almost completely forgot. These were allegations, not charges, not convictions. In August 1993, a 13-year-old boy named Jordan Chandler and his family accused Michael Jackson of sexual abuse. A civil lawsuit followed. The story exploded across the globe within days. Helicopters circled Neverland. Tabloids treated the claims as proven fact. Television networks ran non-stop coverage. The name Michael Jackson alone was enough to guarantee massive ratings. The distinction between an accusation and a proven crime quietly disappeared. No criminal charges were ever filed in that case. Prosecutors ultimately declined to proceed after the boy refused to testify in a criminal trial. In January 1994, the civil matter was settled out of court for a reported sum in the range of $15 to $23 million. Michael and his lawyers repeatedly stated that the settlement was not an admission of guilt. The public, however, largely treated the money as proof. A decade later, in 2005, Michael stood trial on separate criminal charges involving another boy, Gavin Arvizo. After a long and highly publicized trial, a jury acquitted him on every single count. Throughout both crises, most of Michael's siblings stood firmly with him. In late August 1993, the family released a joint statement declaring their collective, unequivocal belief that Michael has been made victim of a cruel and obvious attempt to take advantage of his fame and success. Jermaine read the statement publicly. Katherine Jackson told reporters she did not believe the stories because she had raised him. Jackie, Tito, and Marlon consistently defended their brother in interviews over the years, insisting they knew his character and that the accusations did not match the man they had grown up with. One of the most painful exceptions came from inside the family itself. In December 1993, while Michael was still under intense scrutiny, LaToya Jackson held a press conference in Tel Aviv and claimed the allegations were true. She said she had seen checks written to families of young boys and declared she would not be a silent collaborator. The rest of the family immediately rejected her statements. Katherine called them lies. Years later, LaToya retracted the claims, saying she had been forced to make them by her then-husband, whom she described as abusive and controlling. But the deeper wound the siblings described did not come only from one sister. It came from people who had lived and worked inside Michael's inner circle. They speak of former employees, aides, and associates who had once been trusted, people who had eaten at his table, traveled with him, and been paid by him, who later sold stories, provided damaging information to investigators or tabloids, or publicly turned against him once money was offered. One sibling put it with cold clarity: when it comes to power and money, that's important to people. Some of the people that were closest to him. These are the very ones that got involved to the point where they were paid to go against him. We know it's a lie, but money is more powerful than anything. In the siblings' view, the media did not need a conviction. It only needed the name. Every new allegation, every leaked detail, every former staff member willing to talk for a fee became another product to sell. The line between allegation and established fact grew thinner with each broadcast until many people stopped noticing the difference at all. What made the betrayal cut deepest was its timing. While Michael was under global attack, while his every movement was followed by cameras and speculation, some of the very people who had once stood closest to him chose to cash in. The siblings watched it happen and felt a double isolation. The outside world had already decided, and parts of the inside world had decided that money mattered more than loyalty. They do not claim the world must believe every word they say. They simply insist on a distinction that was almost never respected at the time. An allegation is not the same as a charge. A settlement is not the same as a conviction. And the people who sold stories about a man they once called friend were not neutral witnesses. They were participants in a marketplace that rewarded the most damaging version of events. For the brothers and sisters who stood by Michael, that marketplace left a scar that never fully healed. The loudest voices were not always the closest ones. Sometimes the deepest cuts came from those who had once been trusted enough to stand right beside him. Revelation 5. Michael through his siblings' eyes, the man the world never really saw. Through every scandal, every rumor, and every public judgment, Michael Jackson's brothers and sisters held on to one quiet, stubborn conviction. The world got him wrong. They had watched him from the beginning. They saw the boy who was pushed onto stages before he had finished being a child. They saw the teenager who hid his face because of acne so severe he could barely look people in the eye. They saw the man who carried the weight of global fame while still carrying the private wounds of a childhood that had been traded for work. And what they saw, again and again, was someone far simpler and far more tender than the caricature the public was sold. Michael loved children, not in the twisted way the media repeatedly implied. He loved them the way someone who had been robbed of his own childhood loves the idea of protecting what he never fully received. His siblings watched him do it for years. If a child needed money for hospital treatment, Michael helped. If a family could not afford school fees or the chance at college, he stepped in. These were not publicity stunts. They were quiet, repeated acts that his brothers and sisters witnessed firsthand. One of them put it plainly: if a kid was in need, Michael was there. That was simply who he was. The same siblings looked at another part of Michael that the world mocked and saw something entirely different. The public laughed at his love of Mickey Mouse, Disneyland, cartoons, and all the bright, simple things associated with childhood. Tabloids treated it as proof that something was broken or unnatural in him. His family saw the opposite. They understood that Michael had never been allowed a normal childhood. From a very young age, he was rehearsing, performing, traveling, carrying the financial hopes of an entire family. While other children played, he worked. While other children made ordinary friends and ordinary mistakes, he was already a professional. The part of him that still loved amusement parks, cartoon characters, and the gentle fantasy of childhood was not a sign of arrested development. It was a man trying, in the only way he knew, to reclaim pieces of a life he had been forced to skip. His siblings never romanticized him into a saint. They knew his flaws, his insecurities, his complicated relationship with fame and with their father. But they also knew the private version of Michael that rarely survived contact with the outside world, the one who could be soft, playful, deeply moved by the suffering of children, and stubbornly protective of the small joys he had been denied as a boy. That part of him, they insisted, never disappeared. No matter how strange or distorted his public image became, that core remained intact. They watched the world reduce him to headlines. They watched people decide who he was based on photographs, rumors, and the most sensational version of every story. And they kept returning to the same quiet disagreement with that version. The Michael they knew was not the monster of the tabloids or the pure angel of the most devoted fans. He was a man who had been damaged early, who tried to heal himself with the only tools he had, and who never stopped wanting to give children the safety and wonder he himself had missed. In their eyes, the greatest tragedy was not only what happened to him. It was how completely the public version of Michael Jackson erased the human being they had grown up with. The world saw the stage, the surgeries, the scandals, and the spectacle. His brothers and sisters still saw the boy who once looked down because he was ashamed of his face, the young man who found temporary freedom only under stage lights, and the adult who kept trying, in imperfect ways, to protect the childhood he never got to keep. They never claimed the public had to accept their word as final. They only asked that people remember there was always another Michael, quieter, more complicated, and far more human, living behind the image the world preferred to consume. Do not judge a book only by its cover, and do not let scandals or allegations alone decide who Michael Jackson was. To understand him more fully, we have to look past the loudest headlines and listen to the people who actually lived beside him, the brothers and sisters who saw both the light and the shadow, the pain and the tenderness, the public myth and the private man. If the words shared by Michael Jackson's siblings have moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more honest perspectives on the King of Pop. Share it with anyone who still believes there was more to him than the stories the media chose to sell. Peace, love, and moonwalk. Thank you for watching.